World War II, which precipitated his first visit to a military cemetery, the Bayeux Cemetery for the British military in Normandy. He was shocked. He described the visit as absolutely awful, lamenting that they had tried to make the landscape sort of rather British there. It was flowers and all that, but it didn't matter. His grief was unalloyed. In response, he wrote At the British War Cemetery, Bayeux, in which narrator walks among the graves and grief-strickenly asks what beyond tears he can give these fallen soldiers. The reply that since he can't give them life again, he should use their deaths as an inspiration to live life more fully. It is this very aspiration to inspire survivors to live better and more complete lives, in conjunction with and perhaps overwhelmed by the goal of creating a peaceful place of reflection, repose, and serenity that seems to motivate the designers of military cemeteries. There are 27 such military cemeteries in Normandy, each designed by a specific nationality. My briefing will focus on the design and operation of the British Bayeux War Cemetery, the World War II German cemetery at La Combe, and the Normandy American Cemetery, while simultaneously answering the question of whether these cemeteries effectively create a space that is both inspiring and a place of peace, serenity, and reflection. The Bayeux War Cemetery is the largest British military cemetery of World War II in France, with nearly 4,000 British soldiers. The town of Bayeux was never an actual battlefield and suffered only minor damage. It serves as a British Army base during the Battle of Normandy, and it was liberated on June 7, 1944. British tradition requires that soldiers are buried close to where they died and with their comrades. Many soldiers buried in the cemetery died in nearby field hospitals. Simple white crosses and Star of David gravestones are laid out in a symmetrical pattern, and at one end of the cemetery there's a small garden for reflection. The symmetrical and classic elements of the cemetery seem to harken back to ancient Roman times, when people believed that beauty is found in symmetry, harmony, and proportion. Furthermore, the gravestones appear to be all uniquely inscribed with phrases such as, "Your years will never dim, the sweetness of the happy times we spent together," and "God will link the broken chain closer when we meet again. Mom, Dad, Phil, Iris, Stan." The involvement of the family and the bringing forth testimony from people who loved these deceased soldiers is incredibly moving. The choice to personalize the gravestones makes a significant impact on one's sense of inspiration and of being emotionally overwhelmed in the cemetery. It is through the cathartic build-up and release of intense emotion through that we heal. It is arguable that the Bayou's layout and design elements aid healing and effectively increase one's sense, therefore, of peace and serenity. The Bayeux Memorial is built in white stone and faces the cemetery. It lists the names of 1,801 British Commonwealth soldiers who died in Normandy and whose remains were either not found or unidentified. Along the frieze of the memorial is an epithet in Latin, which references William the Conqueror's 1066 invasion of England. The inscription translates as, "We once conquered by William have now set free the conqueror's native land." The evocation of being set free from tyranny is particularly potent and inspiring. The historic parallel of the Allies fighting to liberate the oppressed becomes something larger than D-Day. It becomes not only an incredibly important moment in modern world history, but because it's been intertwined with liberation from William the Conqueror, visitors to the Bayeux Cemetery staring at the memorial are overwhelmed with the importance this battle holds across time and space and moral. The World War II British Cemetery at La Combe, the largest and most popularly visited German cemetery in France, is significantly different from the Bayeux. It has a much more brooding Gothic feel to it, and it houses considerably more graves relative to the size. Approximately 80,000 German soldiers are buried here in Normandy, and 21,200 of them are buried here in La Combe. There could be a sense of cramming them into something which seems fairly antithetical to peace and serenity. There may be in the cramming a loss of individuality, and a forthrowing of the idea of the individual being lost in the crowd. Established by the United States Army Graves Reservation Service in 1944 as a mixed cemetery site with their German dead buried in one field and American dead in the next field, American soldiers were either reparted or buried at Colville, and the La Combe site was taken over by the German War Graves Commission. German prisoners of war did most of the digging up and separating of the bodies. In 1954, the German War Graves Commission started amassing the remains of German soldiers from small graveyards and burial sites across Normandy, and buried them in six large cemeteries. Lacombe received an extra 12,000 soldiers. The voluntary commission still maintains Lacombe, and I speculate that the origins of a people may have made a significant impact on the impact of the cemetery. The cemetery was established and then lost soldiers and gained soldiers. There's so much upheaval that the idea of intentional planning for a place of peace and comfort may have been lost. The cemetery's grave markers are dark stones laid flat on the ground with soldiers' names engraved on them. The space is broken up by groups of dark granite, primitive-style crosses, and surrounded by nearly 7.5-acre garden where 1,200 maple trees were planted in 2009, symbolizing reconciliation between people. The planting of trees throughout the cemetery comes from a Nordic tradition of ensuring that the dead rest in peace and in shade. While the trees may evoke nature and a force larger than ourselves, the decision to use dark stones flushed to the ground seems an odd choice. The Normandy American Cemetery is the most famous and most frequently visited World War II military cemetery. The first American cemetery in European soil, it was established 2 days after D-Day by the U.S. First Army on high bluffs flanked by cliffs overlooking Omaha Beach with the intention of teaching a didactic history of American valor, sacrifice, and materialism. The lesson may very well be the imperative for future generations to keep peace. The location is evocative of a portal of freedom, which resonates through the visitor's walk as he or she has a panoramic view of Omaha Beach. With 9,388 soldiers, the visitors can feel lost while walking among the innumerable headstones. The cemetery is so frequently visited that some of the more famous graves are usually roped off to protect surrounding grass. President Theodore Roosevelt's oldest son is buried there after having been killed on July 12, 1944, while leading the assault on Utah Beach. As Elizabeth Johnson pointed out when reviewing an earlier draft of his paper, one of the main stylistic design features of the American cemeteries across the world is that the gravestones are identical in shape and size to emphasize how every person's sacrifice was equal, regardless of who they were or what rank they held. Famous aside, Roosevelt Jr.'s gravestone is the same size and shape as everyone else, which effectively emphasizes the idea of equality. Regardless of background and who they were off the battlefield, all these men and women were bonded by their experiences serving the Allies together. And there were an awful lot of them. The graves are seemingly endless, and combined with the gravestones, clarity of design and purposeful message, the consistently symmetric spacing and presentation of these graves has a subsequent effect on the visitor. People are drawn to the moving experience of walking among endless rows of individual graves. On one end of the cemetery is a memorial, in the center of which is a 22-foot-tall bronze statue, fittingly called Spirit of American Youth Rising from the Waves, likely intended to remind visitors of the heroism of those who fought and died in battle. Inscribed on the side is the following: "This embattled shore, portal of freedom, is forever hallowed by the ideals, the valor, the sacrifices of our fellow countrymen." The lofty and valorous rhetoric of this sentence must surely have been intended to inspire. There is an orientation table overlooking the beach with information about the landings in Normandy. To the west is a reflecting pool, beyond which is the burial area with a granite chapel and, at the far end, granite statues representing the United States and France. Behind the memorial is the semicircular walls of the missing, listing 1,557 Americans who died in the invasion, related operations, and those whose remains have not been found. Cemeteries and memorials dedicated to the deceased serve many purposes. They provide a tangible space and important reminder of those who have passed on. They provide a space to think about and celebrate loved ones, and they can help encourage rituals of grief to ease the healing process. Particularly in the case of military cemeteries, they can serve to promote historic memory and reverence for those who have served their country and help mold and usher the beautiful world into a modern era. Bayou, Lacombe, and the Normandy American Cemetery are, to varying extents and degrees of success, inspiring examples of intentional, effective architecture and planning, and vision, which have resulted in places evocative of feelings of peace, reflection, and remembrance.